My own mother casually admitted she sold my newly paid-off car to cover her hidden credit card debt, expecting me to just accept the devastating loss. So, I reported it stolen, setting a trap that ended with police at her door. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The exhaustion was sitting in my bones like lead. I was 29 years old, working as a senior data systems engineer, and for the past 14 months, I had been pulling 80-hour weeks. The dark circles under my eyes were practically permanent, and my diet had consisted almost entirely of lukewarm coffee and whatever I could microwave in under 3 minutes. But all of that soul-crushing fatigue was supposed to be worth it. I had done it. I had fully paid off my brand-new 2024 Camry. $34,000, completely wiped out in record time. It was my first major, tangible victory as an adult, a gleaming symbol of my financial independence. Because I traveled extensively for on-site server installations, I had made the entirely logical, but ultimately fatal, decision to leave the car parked safely in the climate-controlled garage at my mother's house, while I was on a grueling 6-week contract in London. I had even left a spare key and an envelope of important documents, including the title, locked in what I thought was a secure firebox in her guest room closet. I arrived straight from the airport, hauling my heavy suitcase up the driveway. My head was pounding with jet lag, and a scratchy, dry cough was clawing at my throat. All I wanted was to slide into the driver's seat of my own car, breathe in that lingering new car scent, and drive back to my apartment to sleep for 2 days straight. I punched the code into the keypad outside the garage. The heavy door rattled and began its slow ascent. I stood there, blinking against the harsh afternoon sun, waiting for the familiar gleam of the metallic gray paint. But as the door rose higher, my stomach suddenly plummeted into my shoes. The garage was empty. There were a few cardboard boxes, a dusty bicycle, and a grease stain on the concrete. Nothing else. Panic, sharp and icy, spiked in my chest. I dropped my suitcase handle. It hit the driveway with a loud clatter. I pulled out my phone, my thumbs fumbling over the screen, ready to dial the police. Before I could even open the keypad, the side door of the house swung open. My mother, Brenda, stepped out. She was 56, but spent an exorbitant amount of time and resources looking 10 years younger. She was wearing a perfectly tailored silk blouse, her hair was freshly blown out, and she held a delicate ceramic mug of green tea. She looked completely unbothered, radiant even. "Abigail, you're back early," she said, her voice a sing-song melody of artificial sweetness. "Mom," I gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the empty concrete. "Where is my car? My car is gone. Did someone break in?" Brenda took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. She didn't look at the garage. She looked right at me, her eyes flat and devoid of any genuine concern. "Oh, don't overreact, sweetheart," she said casually, waving her free hand as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "Nobody broke in." "Then where is it?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The pounding in my head amplified. Brenda sighed, a heavy, put-upon sound that suggested I was being entirely unreasonable. She leaned against the doorframe, adjusting the collar of her silk blouse. "I sold it, Abigail," she stated. Her tone was so impossibly nonchalant, she might as well have been telling me she threw out a carton of expired milk. I had to pay off my credit card. It was getting out of hand. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The roaring of an airplane engine rushed back into my ears, deafening me. I stared at the woman who had raised me, trying to comprehend the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the words that had just left her mouth. $34,000. My blood, my sweat, my endless sleepless nights. Sold. I couldn't breathe. My chest heaved, but no air seemed to reach my lungs. The betrayal was worse than the financial ruin she was trying to force upon me. You sold it?" The words barely scraped past my vocal cords. They sounded foreign, as if someone else was speaking them. "Yes, Abigail, keep up," Brenda said, rolling her eyes. She turned and walked back into the house. I stood paralyzed for another 3 seconds before the sheer adrenaline forced my legs to move. I stumbled after her, leaving my luggage abandoned on the driveway. I found her in her immaculate, over-decorated kitchen, pouring herself a fresh cup of hot water. "Mom, you can't be serious," I choked out, grabbing the edge of the granite countertop to steady myself. The room was spinning. "That was my car. My name is on the title. I just paid it off. How could you even do that? It's illegal." "Oh, please, lower your voice," Brenda hissed, glancing toward the hallway as if afraid the neighbors could hear through the walls. "It wasn't complicated. I found the spare key in that silly little lockbox of yours. Honestly, Abigail, a child could pick that thing. And since you had the title in there, I just signed it over. I am your mother, after all." The buyer didn't ask too many questions. I told him you were going through a rough patch and needed the cash immediately. "A rough patch," I screamed, the jet lag burning away, replaced by a white-hot, consuming fury. "You forged my signature. You stole a $34,000 vehicle." "Stop being so dramatic." Brenda slammed her mug onto the counter, the hot water splashing over the rim. Her face flushed with sudden, defensive anger. "You have no idea the stress I've been under. The interest rates were killing me. Haley needed new equipment for her vlogging channel, and you know how important her career is. Plus, the Homeowners Association was threatening to fine me for the landscaping. I was drowning, Abigail." "So you drowned me instead?" I asked, tears of pure rage finally spilling over my eyelashes. "I worked 80 hours a week for over a year. I ate noodles. I didn't go out. I gave up everything to own that car outright. And you make plenty of money doing whatever it is you do with those computers." She countered sharply, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You have no dependents. You have no mortgage. You can just buy another one. We are family, Abigail. Family helps family. You're acting incredibly selfish right now." I stared at her. The sheer entitlement, the absolute lack of remorse, was staggering. She truly believed that my hard work was simply a resource pool for her to dip into whenever her irresponsible spending caught up with her. She thought I would just cry, maybe yell for an hour, and then ultimately absorb the loss. She thought I would be the good, compliant daughter I had always been. My hands were shaking violently. I wanted to smash the expensive ceramic mug on the floor. I wanted to tear down the overpriced curtains she had undoubtedly bought on credit. I felt a suffocating pressure in my chest, a lifetime of yielding to her demands threatening to crush me right there in the kitchen. I turned away from her, stumbling down the hallway and locking myself in the guest bathroom. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring at my pale, exhausted reflection in the mirror. I looked broken. I looked like the perfect victim. Brenda's voice drifted through the door, muffled but still dripping with annoyance. "Are you going to sulk all day? Because Haley is coming over later, and I don't want your negative energy ruining the evening." I turned on the cold water and splashed it onto my face. The icy shock cleared the fog in my brain. My breathing began to slow, the erratic gasps smoothing out into deep, measured intakes of air. She thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted me and backed me into a corner where I had no choice but to accept her narrative of family sacrifice. But she had forgotten one crucial thing, to understand how my mother could look me in the eye and justify stealing a vehicle worth tens of thousands of dollars. You have to understand the dynamic that had governed our household for decades. Brenda was a woman who lived exclusively for appearances. To the outside world, she was a sophisticated, successful, boutique consultant. A vague title she used to describe occasionally giving terrible interior design advice to her equally vapid friends. In reality, she was chronically unemployed and aggressively addicted to living beyond her means. Her entire existence was funded by a perilous house of cards built on maxed-out credit lines, predatory loans, and whatever money she could guilt out of her children. Or rather, guilt out of me. My younger sister, Haley, was 24 and the undisputed golden child. Haley had inherited our mother's talent for spending and her aversion to actual labor. Haley was currently building her brand as a lifestyle influencer, which essentially meant she lived rent-free in my mother's house, slept until noon, and demanded expensive clothes and lighting equipment to film videos that averaged 42 views. Brenda enabled this entirely, viewing Haley as an extension of her own desired glamorous lifestyle. I, on the other hand, was the workhorse. I had been working since I was 16, bagging groceries just to buy my own school supplies because Brenda had spent the back-to-school budget on a designer handbag. I was the reliable one, the boring one, the ATM. 2 years ago, Brenda was facing foreclosure because she had stopped paying her mortgage for 6 months without telling anyone. It was my savings account that she drained. I had handed over $12,000, money I had earmarked for a down payment on a modest condo, just to keep a roof over her and Haley's heads. She had wept, promised to change, and swore she would pay me back every cent. 3 weeks later, she bought a $3,000 espresso machine. I stood in the guest bathroom, letting the cold water drip from my chin. The memories of every unpaid loan, every manipulated guilt trip, and every time she had prioritized her vanity over my basic needs flashed through my mind like a slideshow. I remembered the exact tone of her voice when she demanded that rent money 2 years ago, the same entitlement, the same aggressive dismissal of my own life goals. She saw me as a bottomless well, a supporting character in the grand, dramatic production of her life. I grabbed a hand towel and slowly dried my face. The terrified, exhausted girl who had walked into the house 15 minutes ago was gone. In her place was a cold, calculating professional who managed complex data infrastructures and mitigated multi-million-dollar corporate risks for a living. Brenda thought she had committed the perfect crime because she believed her victim was weak. She believed I was still the same obedient daughter who would sacrifice her own future to maintain the illusion of family peace. She thought her forged signature on a piece of paper was the end of the story. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back into the hallway. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of Brenda turning on the television in the living room. I didn't go back into the kitchen to argue. I didn't scream or cry. I simply walked out the front door, retrieved my suitcase from the driveway, and called a cab. As I sat in the back of the taxi, watching my mother's manicured lawn fade into the distance, I pulled out my phone. I wasn't going to absorb this loss. I wasn't going to play my assigned role anymore. It was time to introduce Brenda to the real world, where actions had devastating, permanent consequences. The cab ride back to my apartment was a blur of city lights and the rhythmic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. I sat in the backseat, my hands tightly clutched around my phone, refusing to let the exhaustion pull me under. Brenda had operated under the assumption that I was naive, that I was simply a hard worker with no street smarts and a bleeding heart. But she had forgotten one crucial thing, a detail so glaringly obvious to anyone who actually paid attention to modern technology, but entirely invisible to a woman who only used her phone for online shopping and social media. My 2024 Camry was equipped with an advanced, integrated telematics system. It had a dedicated app on my phone, an app that tracked the vehicle's diagnostics, tire pressure, fuel levels, and most importantly, its exact, real-time GPS location. Furthermore, Brenda's arrogance had blinded her to basic legal documentation. The piece of paper she had triumphantly extracted from my firebox, the one she had so confidently signed my forged name upon, was not the actual vehicle title. It was a high-quality photocopy I kept for my personal records, one that had the word "copy" faintly but distinctly watermarked across the bottom left corner. The actual, legally binding title was sitting securely in a steel safe deposit box at my local Chase Bank branch. Brenda hadn't sold my car, She had sold a delusion. She had committed blatant, undeniable fraud. The moment I stepped inside my quiet, dark apartment, I didn't even bother to unpack. I dropped my suitcase by the door, walked straight to my home office, and woke up my multi-monitor workstation. The familiar hum of the cooling fans grounded me. This was my domain. I was a data systems engineer. Uncovering hidden information and tracing digital footprints was not just my job, it was my second nature. I opened the Toyota app. A map of the city materialized on the screen, and a glowing red pin dropped onto a residential street in a neighborhood roughly 12 miles away from my mother's house. The car was parked in the driveway of a modest, single-story home. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and dialed the police non-emergency line. The line rang 3 times before a dispatcher answered. "Central Dispatch, how can I help you?" a crisp, professional voice asked. "Hello," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "I need to report a stolen vehicle. However, I know exactly where the vehicle is currently located, and I know who possesses it." I spent the next 20 minutes giving the dispatcher every single detail. I gave them the VIN, the license plate, the make, and the model. I explained the exact circumstances. I had been out of the country, the car was stored at a family member's home, and it had been ill. Legally sold without my consent using forged documents. I explicitly stated that I was the sole legal owner and that I had the original, legitimate title in a bank vault. "I have the live GPS coordinates," I told the officer they transferred me to, a Detective Miller. "The vehicle is parked at 442 Elmira Lane. It hasn't moved for 3 hours. We are dispatching a unit to that location right now, ma'am," Detective Miller said, his tone shifting from routine to highly alert. "Do not approach the vehicle or the residence yourself. We will contact the individual in possession of the car. We will also need you to come down to the precinct tomorrow morning with the original title to file a formal grand theft and fraud report against the person who initiated the sale. I will be there the second the doors open," I promised. After hanging up, I didn't stop. I opened a new browser window and logged into the county's public records database. If Brenda was desperate enough to commit a felony for quick cash, I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I paid the nominal access fee and ran a comprehensive background check on my own mother. What I found over the next 2 hours made my stomach churn. The $12,000 I had given her 2 years ago hadn't fixed anything. It had only delayed the inevitable. The screen filled with a cascading list of financial disasters. There were 3 active liens against her house from unpaid contractors. There were 2 civil judgments for defaulted personal loans. Her property taxes were wildly in arrears, and a notice of default had been filed just 10 days ago. She wasn't just drowning. She was actively pulling the ship down to the bottom of the ocean, and she had tried to use my car as a life raft. I then pulled up my sister Haley's public social media accounts. Haley had spent the last 3 weeks posting unboxing videos of high-end camera lenses, designer lighting rigs, and a brand new, top-of-the-line MacBook Pro. The captions read, "Thanks to my amazing mom, the ultimate investor in my dreams. Blessed influencer life." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Brenda hadn't stolen my car to save the house. She had stolen it to fund Haley's delusions of grandeur and to keep up the appearance of a wealthy benefactor. She had sacrificed my literal blood, sweat, and tears for ring lights and fake internet clout. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an unknown number. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone. "Hello, is this Abigail?" a deep, panicked male voice asked. "Speaking," I said coldly. "My name is Greg. Look, please, I have 2 police officers standing in my living room right now. They're telling me the Camry sitting in my driveway is stolen. They have a tow truck backing up to my house as we speak. What is going on? Your mother told me you were in financial trouble and needed to liquidate the car immediately." I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, staring at the flashing cursor on my monitor. The desperation in Greg's voice was palpable. He was a 42-year-old mechanic who had likely thought he was getting the deal of a lifetime, only to find himself entangled in a massive felony investigation. "Greg, I am very sorry that you have been caught up in this," I said, keeping my tone measured and professional. "But my mother lied to you. I am not in financial trouble. I was in London for work. I paid that car off entirely on my own, and I left it parked in her garage for safekeeping. She broke into my lockbox, found a watermarked copy of the title, and forged my signature." "A copy?" Greg's voice cracked. She showed me the paper. It looked real. I gave her $22,000 in cash, a cashier's check. I drained my savings account for this car so I could have a reliable vehicle for my kids. My heart broke for him, but my resolve hardened into solid steel. Brenda had not only destroyed my trust, but she had also completely devastated a hardworking father's savings. "Give the police everything, Greg," I instructed firmly. "Give them the fake title she signed. Give them her phone number, her address, the text she sent you, and the paper trail for the cashier's check. Do exactly what the officers say. If you cooperate, they will see you are a victim of fraud." I am giving them everything," he stammered, sounding close to tears. "The officer wants to speak to you." There was a brief rustling sound, and then Detective Miller's voice came over the line. "Abigail, it's Detective Miller. We are impounding the vehicle as evidence. Mr. Gregg here has been entirely cooperative. He has produced the fraudulent document bearing what appears to be a forged signature, along with a receipt of payment made out directly to your mother, Brenda. This elevates the situation significantly." "I understand, Detective. I will be at the precinct tomorrow at 8:00 a.m. with the original title," I confirmed. I hung up the phone. He trap had not just snapped shut, it had utterly crushed the foundation of Brenda's lie. Barely 10 minutes later, the violent, repeated buzzing of my apartment intercom shattered the silence. I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall. Brenda and Haley were standing in the lobby. Brenda was furiously mashing the call button, her perfectly blown-out hair slightly frizzy, her face contorted in an ugly mask of panic and rage. Haley stood behind her, looking confused and holding her phone as if she were about to start live-streaming the encounter. I pressed the button to unlock the front doors, letting them into the building. I wanted this confrontation. I needed it. I opened my apartment door just as they stepped off the elevator. Brenda stormed down the hallway, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the linoleum. "What did you do?" Brenda shrieked before she even crossed the threshold. She pushed past me into the living room, her eyes wild. "Greg just called me screaming about the police. He said they took the car. Are you insane, Abigail? You called the police on your own mother." Haley trailed in behind her, crossing her arms defensively. "Seriously, Abby, what is wrong with you? Mom said you guys had a disagreement about the car, but calling the cops, that is so toxic and unnecessary." I slowly closed the door until it clicked shut. I turned to face them, feeling an unnerving sense of calm wash over me. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating precision. "A disagreement," I repeated, raising an eyebrow at my younger sister. "Is that what she told you, Haley? A disagreement?" "Yes," Brenda interrupted, her voice shrill and desperate. "It's a family matter. You call those officers right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I had your permission to hold the vehicle as collateral for the money I've spent raising you." "You want me to lie to the police," I stated flatly, analyzing her pathetic attempt at manipulation. "You want me to commit a federal crime by filing a false police report to cover up the grand theft and fraud you committed." "It's not fraud," Brenda screamed, stamping her foot like a petulant toddler. "I am your mother. Everything you have is because of me. You owe me. I had to sell it. The creditors were calling every day, threatening to take the house." I walked over to my desk and picked up a stack of printed papers I had just generated from the county database. I walked back and slammed the papers onto the coffee table right in front of Haley. "Look at them, Haley," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Look at the public records." Haley blinked, taken aback by my tone. She tentatively reached out and picked up the top sheet. "Mom didn't sell my car to save the house," I said, staring directly into Haley's widening eyes. "The house is already in default. There are 3 liens on it. Mom sold my car. She forged my signature on a voided copy of a title to swindle a mechanic out of $22,000 to buy you your new camera equipment." Haley's face drained of color. She looked from the printed notice of default in her hands to our mother, her mouth hanging open. The carefully constructed illusion of the wealthy, supportive mom was crumbling into dust right in front of her. "Mom," Haley whispered, her voice trembling, "is this true? You said your investments paid out. You said you had plenty of capital for my channel." Brenda's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. She snatched the papers out of Haley's hands and crumpled them up, throwing them onto the floor. "Don't listen to her. She's lying. She's always been jealous of you, Haley. She's just trying to tear our family apart because she's a miserable, lonely workaholic." "The county clerk doesn't lie, Brenda," I said coldly, dropping the title of Mom entirely. "And neither does Greg's cashier's check, which the police currently have in an evidence bag, along with the fake title you signed." Brenda let out a short, hysterical laugh. "It wasn't fake. I found it in your little box. You can't prove I forged anything. It was your car, but I'm your mother. The judge will understand." "The judge will understand that you missed the giant, watermarked word, copy, on the back of the paper because you were too greedy and rushed to look closely," I countered, taking a step toward her. The air in the room felt electric. "The real title, the legal document proving my sole ownership, has been sitting in a Chase Bank vault for 6 months." Brenda stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the area rug. The arrogant sneer vanished from her face, replaced by genuine, unadulterated terror. The reality of the situation was finally penetrating her thick skull. This wasn't a family argument she could guilt her way out of. This was the criminal justice system, and it was coming for her. "No," Brenda gasped, shaking her head frantically. "No, you have to fix this, Abigail. You have to call them back, tell them you forgot, tell them you gave me verbal permission." "And what about Greg?" I asked, my voice laced with disgust. "The man whose $22,000 you stole? Do I just tell him tough luck because my mother has a shopping addiction?" "He's just some mechanic," Brenda shrieked, her mask completely slipping, revealing the ugly, elitist entitlement underneath. "He'll figure it out. I am your mother. If I go to jail, my life is ruined. My reputation in the community will be destroyed. Do you know what this will do to my boutique business?" "What business, Brenda?" I snapped, the final thread of my patience snapping. "You don't have a business. You sit around drinking tea and spending money you don't have. You are a fraud. And now you are a criminal." Haley was backing away toward the front door, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, you forged her signature. You stole a car. You bought my laptop with stolen money." "Haley, sweetheart, no, it's not like that," Brenda pleaded, turning to her golden child, desperately trying to keep her grip on at least one manipulation. "I did it for you. I did it so you could be a star. We are a team, remember." "I don't want to go to jail," Haley cried out, suddenly realizing she was in possession of goods purchased with stolen funds. "Abby, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know where the money came from." "I know you didn't, Haley," I said softly, though I offered no comfort. Haley was spoiled and oblivious, but she wasn't the mastermind. "But Mom is going to have to answer for where that money went. And if she used Greg's stolen cash to buy your equipment, the police are going to confiscate all of it as evidence." Haley let out a loud sob and ran out the front door, leaving it wide open behind her. We could hear her footsteps sprinting down the hallway toward the elevator. Brenda was left standing alone in the center of my living room. Her perfect hair was a mess. Her silk blouse looked suddenly cheap. The grandiose, untouchable matriarch had been reduced to a cornered, terrified thief. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and absolute panic. She realized that the leverage was entirely in my hands, and for the first time in my 29 years of life, I was utterly refusing to yield. "You are going to regret this, Abigail," Brenda hissed, her voice shaking with impotent fury. "You are destroying your own family." "No, Brenda," I corrected her calmly, walking over and pointing toward the open door. "I am just handing over the blueprints of the destruction you caused. The police are going to build the case. Now get out of my apartment before I call them and tell them exactly where you are." I did not sleep that night. I sat in the glow of my dual monitors, watching the city skyline turn from an inky black to a bruised, pre-dawn purple, and finally to a pale, unforgiving gray. I spent those hours organizing every digital receipt, every bank statement, and every threatening text message my mother had ever sent me regarding money. I created a meticulously organized binder. I was no longer just a daughter dealing with a difficult parent. I was a data systems engineer executing a flawless system audit on the life of Brenda. At exactly 7:50 a.m., I was standing outside the heavy glass doors of the precinct, grasping a manila envelope that contained the original, watermarked, legally indisputable title to my 2024 Camry, freshly extracted from my Chase Bank safe deposit box. My meeting with Detective Miller was swift and devastatingly efficient. He examined the genuine title, compared it to the forged photocopy Greg had provided, and shook his head in disbelief. He took my formal, sworn statement. He did not mince words about the severity of the charges: grand theft, forgery, fraud by false representation. When I walked out of that precinct at 9:30 a.m., the wheels of the criminal justice system had been irreversibly set into motion. I was sitting in a coffee shop down the street, drinking a black tea and trying to process the magnitude of what I had just done, when my phone vibrated loudly against the wooden table. It was a text message from my Aunt Susan, Brenda's older sister. "Abigail, honey, we are all gathering at your mother's house for a support luncheon at noon. She called me in tears this morning. She says the stress of your demanding job has caused you to have a severe mental breakdown and that you are having delusions about your car being stolen. We are here to stage an intervention and get you the psychiatric help you need. Please come. We love you." I stared at the screen, a cold, humorless laugh escaping my lips. A support luncheon, an intervention. Brenda was backed into a corner, facing imminent arrest, and her instinct was to throw a catered party to control the narrative. She was going to surround herself with her country club friends and extended family, painting me as a hysterical, overworked lunatic, so that when the fallout happened, she would be the tragic victim of a mentally unstable daughter. I didn't reply to Aunt Susan. I simply stood up, threw my empty cup in the trash, and walked to the nearest rental car agency. I rented an unassuming silver sedan, gripping the steering wheel as I drove back toward the suburbs. The exhaustion from my London trip was completely eradicated, replaced by a singular, laser-focused purpose. I parked half a block away from my mother's house. The driveway and the street were lined with luxury SUVs and expensive sedans. I walked up the manicured sidewalk, my organized binder tucked securely under my arm. I didn't bother knocking. I turned the handle and pushed the heavy oak front door open. The low hum of sympathetic chatter and the clinking of fine china immediately washed over me. The living room was packed. There were at least 15 people: my aunts, a few uncles, and half a dozen of Brenda's boutique consultant friends, all dressed in their daytime best, sipping sparkling water and eating tiny, crustless sandwiches. In the center of the room sat Brenda. She was perched on a velvet armchair, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked up as the door clicked shut behind me. The color instantly drained from her heavily contoured face. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Every pair of eyes turned to me. "Abigail," Aunt Susan gasped, stepping forward with a look of deep, patronizing pity. "Oh, sweetheart, you look exhausted. We are so glad you came. Your mother has been absolutely beside herself with worry about your mental state." "My mental state is perfectly fine, Susan," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the silent room. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I am here because Brenda called you all here under false pretenses. She is not a concerned mother. She is a criminal desperately trying to build a jury of her peers before the actual authorities arrive. A collective gasp echoed through the living room. One of Brenda's friends, a woman draped in expensive pearls, clutched her chest. Abigail, how can you speak to your mother that way? She is terrified for your health. She told us about your delusions regarding the car. Delusions? I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step into the center of the room. I held up the thick binder. Is that what she called it? Did she tell you that yesterday afternoon, while I was flying home from a 6-week work contract, she broke into my personal firebox? Did she tell you she took a voided photocopy of my vehicle's title, forged my legal signature, and sold my newly paid-off car to a mechanic named Greg for $22,000 in cash? Stop it, Brenda shrieked, leaping to her feet. The lace handkerchief fluttered to the floor. Her voice was shrill, panicked, and utterly devoid of its usual polished elegance. Susan, don't listen to her. The doctor said she might lash out. She's having a psychotic break. I spent my morning at the 4th Precinct, Brenda, I stated loudly, cutting through her hysterical screaming. I opened the binder and pulled out the carbon copy of the police report I had just filed. I held it up for the entire room to see. I just handed over the original, watermarked title of my vehicle to Detective Miller. The vehicle has been impounded by the state. The cashier's check you deposited, the one you stole from a hardworking father of 2, is currently sitting in an evidence locker. The guests were frozen, their eyes darting rapidly between my steady, uncompromising posture and Brenda's frantic, unraveling demeanor. You're lying, Brenda screamed, taking a threatening step toward me. You are a jealous, hateful girl. I am your mother. I provided everything for you. If I borrowed that car, it was my right. This is my house, and I demand you leave. Your house, I countered, my voice dripping with cold authority. I pulled the county clerk documents from the binder and tossed them onto the polished oak coffee table right next to the tray of sandwiches. Take a look, Susan. Take a look, everyone. Notice of default. 3 active contractor liens, 2 civil judgments. She didn't sell my car to help the family. She sold it because her massive, hidden mountain of debt is finally burying her. Aunt Susan tentatively reached forward and picked up the documents. Her eyes scanned the bold black ink, the official county seals, the staggering numbers of unpaid debt. Susan's jaw dropped. She looked at Brenda, her expression morphing from pity to absolute horror. Brenda, Susan whispered, her voice trembling. What is this? Are you losing the house? You told me your design firm was having a record quarter. It's a mistake, Brenda babbled, her hands shaking violently as she reached out to snatch the papers, but Susan pulled them away. It's a clerical error. Abigail fabricated those. She works with computers. She knows how to fake documents. She didn't fake anything, Mom. The voice came from the top of the staircase. Everyone turned. Haley was standing on the landing. She looked entirely different than she had the day before. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her makeup was washed off, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying all night. But what commanded the room's attention wasn't her appearance. It was what she was carrying. Haley slowly walked down the stairs, struggling under the weight of 2 large, heavy cardboard boxes. She reached the bottom step and dropped the boxes onto the hardwood floor with a loud, resounding thud that made several guests jump. Haley, what are you doing? Brenda hissed, her eyes widening in renewed panic. Go back upstairs. No, Haley said, her voice shaking but resolute. She kicked the top flap of the box open. Inside sat the brand-new, top-of-the-line camera lenses, the expensive lighting rigs, and the pristine, silver MacBook Pro. Mom bought all of this for me 3 days ago, Haley said, looking directly at Aunt Susan and the crowd of terrified guests. Tears began to spill down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She told me her investments paid out. She told me she believed in my dreams, but it was a lie. Haley turned and looked at me, a profound, agonizing realization shining in her young eyes. The spoiled, entitled facade had been completely shattered by the harsh light of reality. She stole Abigail's car, Haley announced to the room, her voice cracking with shame. She stole from my sister, who has done nothing but work herself half to death to support us, to buy me camera equipment. I am so sorry, Abby. I didn't know, but I know now. Haley stepped away from the boxes and walked over to stand right beside me, presenting a unified, impenetrable front against our mother. I called the precinct this morning, too, Haley added softly, looking at the floor. I asked for Detective Miller. I told him I was in possession of goods purchased with the stolen funds. They are sending an officer to collect it as evidence. The room erupted into absolute chaos. The boutique friends began grabbing their designer purses and rushing toward the door, desperate to avoid being associated with a criminal investigation. Aunt Susan dropped the foreclosure notices back onto the table, covering her mouth with her hands, backing away from her sister as if Brenda were suddenly contagious. Brenda stood entirely alone in the center of her living room. The grand audience she had assembled to validate her lies had just witnessed her complete and utter destruction. She looked at me, then at Haley, her chest heaving, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly as the reality of her total isolation finally set in. Before Brenda could formulate a single word of defense, before the last of her horrified friends could even cross the threshold of the front door, the heavy, authoritative sound of a fist pounding against the exterior wood echoed through the entryway. "Police department," a deep voice called out, "open the door." The remaining guests froze in their tracks. Brenda let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper, her knees buckling slightly as she grabbed the back of the velvet armchair for support. Aunt Susan, pale and trembling, reached out and pulled the front door open. Detective Miller stood on the porch, flanked by two uniformed patrol officers. His expression was stern, professional, and entirely devoid of the sympathy Brenda usually commanded from the men she manipulated. He stepped into the house, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene before landing squarely on my mother. "Brenda?" Detective Miller asked, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. "Officer, please, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," Brenda cried out, her voice reverting to that sickening, artificial sweetness, though it was now laced with pure terror. She took a step toward him, holding her hands out pleadingly. "This is just a family dispute. My daughters are very upset with me over a financial disagreement. You don't need to be here. We are handling this privately." Detective Miller didn't even blink. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. "Ma'am, I have a warrant for your arrest," he stated, his voice booming over the quiet whimpers of Aunt Susan. "You are being charged with grand theft, auto, forgery, and criminal fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No," Brenda shrieked, scrambling backward, her designer heels slipping on the hardwood floor. "No, you can't. I am a respected member of this community. You can't do this. Abigail, tell them. Tell them you gave me permission. Haley, help me." Neither Haley nor I moved a single muscle. We stood shoulder to shoulder, bearing witness to the inevitable consequence of a life. Time of entitlement. The two uniformed officers stepped forward, swiftly closing the distance. They caught Brenda by the arms, spinning her around. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the vaulted living room was the most definitive, satisfying sound I had ever heard in my life. "Brenda, you have the right to remain silent," Detective Miller recited calmly, ignoring her hysterical sobbing and kicking as the officers began to march her toward the door. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Brenda was dragged out the front door, her perfectly blown-out hair a tangled mess, her silk blouse wrinkled. I watched through the large bay window as they led her down the manicured walkway, past the luxury cars of her fleeing friends, and placed her into the back of the marked police cruiser. The neighbors were standing on their lawns, pointing and whispering. The social exile she had feared more than anything else was instantaneous and absolute. As the cruiser pulled away, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of the impending foreclosed house, the heavy, suffocating atmosphere in the room finally broke. Aunt Susan left shortly after, too ashamed to even look me in the eye. Haley and I were left alone in the quiet, echoing house. We sat down on the front porch steps, side by side, looking out at the empty driveway where my car used to be. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, breathing in the cool afternoon air, letting the adrenaline drain from our systems. "I'm sorry, Abby," Haley finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled her knees up to her chest, looking small and fragile. "I was so stupid. I just wanted to believe her. I wanted the easy way out. I never wanted it to be at your expense." I looked at my younger sister. For years, I had resented her. I had viewed her as an extension of Brenda's greed, but in that crucial, defining moment in the living room, Haley had made a choice. She had chosen the truth over her own comfort. She had chosen me. I reached out and wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned into me, resting her head against my arm, and finally began to cry in earnest. "I know, Haley," I said softly, resting my chin on her head. "I know, it's over now. The cycle stops here. We're going to have to set some very strict boundaries moving forward, and you are going to have to learn how to support yourself. But you aren't alone. You have me, and I will help you figure it out the right way." The healing wasn't going to happen overnight, but for the first time in my life, I felt a genuine, honest connection with my sister. The toxic weed that had choked our family had been ripped out by the roots. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Brenda's house was formally seized by the bank. With her fraud exposed, her credit completely destroyed, and her social standing obliterated, she was facing significant jail time. But my priority was ensuring justice for the collateral damage. I couldn't legally give Greg his money back. The cashier's check was tied up in the criminal evidence process, and Brenda had already spent thousands of it before she was caught. But I wasn't going to let a hardworking father take the fall for my mother's crimes. Using my corporate network, I reached out to a high-powered fraud attorney I had consulted with on previous data breach contracts. I explained the situation, the undeniable paper trail, and Greg's total innocence. Moved by the story, the attorney took Greg's case pro bono. Within a month, they successfully sued the bank that had issued the fraudulent loan and utilized their fraud insurance to fully reimburse Greg for his $22,000. Greg called me the day the funds cleared, weeping with gratitude, thanking me for not abandoning him in the crossfire. As for me, the legal system recognized the theft, and my insurance provider, after a lengthy review of the police reports and the recovered forged documents, issued a full payout for the value of the stolen 2024 Camry. 3 months later, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, sipping a cup of hot coffee and looking out over the city skyline. The dark circles under my eyes were finally fading. The exhaustion was gone. I had taken the insurance payout, and instead of buying a new car right away, I invested it into a high-yield portfolio. I didn't need a car for the city right now. What I needed was exactly what I had finally achieved: peace, vindication, and the absolute certainty that my hard work belonged to me and me alone. The trap I had set hadn't just caught a thief. It had set me completely free.